I only bought this place for shelter, but something beneath the floor knew my family.
She was 25 and alone. No apartment, no savings, no family door left open. Just a canvas bag and $8 she had counted 3 times before leaving the city behind. And with that $8, she bought an abandoned papermill drying shed hidden near RittenhouseTown, Philadelphia County, Pennsylvania, in 1972, the year the forgotten mill district faded from maps. The roof leaked through rotten boards. The floor sagged beneath her feet. Philadelphia County condemned the shed in 1968 and scheduled demolition for the following spring season. Behind a sealed section of oak decal frame, unopened for more than a century, rested a hidden compartment containing something that would change Wren's life forever. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Wren Holloway had been preserving things her whole life without knowing it. She grew up in a narrow brick row house outside Philadelphia, where every broken object seemed to have one more season left in it. Her father repaired old furniture after work, and her mother saved buttons, ribbons, and scraps of cloth in glass jars above the kitchen sink. Wren learned early that discarded things were often only waiting for the right hands. Her father, Elias, never called it saving, he called it listening. A cracked chair leg, a warped drawer, or a torn piece of fabric always carried evidence of how it had been made. He showed her how to hold an object before trying to fix it, because rushing usually meant missing the reason it had failed. The person who shaped her hands most was her grandmother's older cousin, Clara Whitmore, a quiet woman who still practiced traditional papermaking in a small workshop near the old Rittenhouse area every Saturday morning. Clara's workshop smelled of wet linen, wood smoke, and clean water. She kept a collection of antique moulds and decals hanging along the wall, each one repaired carefully rather than replaced. When Wren was 12, Clara began allowing her to help sort cotton scraps, stir pulp vats, and press handmade sheets beneath an old iron press that required patience more than strength. Every weekend, they repeated the same ritual. Clara prepared the pulp while Wren cleaned the copper mesh screens and checked the drying frames. The older woman never hurried the process. She believed paper remembered the hands that shaped it. You cannot force something delicate to become strong, Clara once told her. You prepare it, you protect it, and you give it time. Wren carried those words into adulthood because they explained more than paper. They explained people who had been bent by circumstances but not destroyed. After Clara died, the workshop was emptied within weeks. The family members who remained saw only old equipment, faded notebooks, and stacks of materials that no longer had value. Wren arrived too late. The moulds, the handwritten recipes, and Clara's favourite brass tools were already gone. For years, she kept one small piece of torn handmade paper from Clara's table inside a book. It was the only thing she had left from the craft that had once connected them. Then came Aaron Vale. At first, Aaron seemed careful and dependable. He spoke softly, remembered small details, and always appeared to have a plan for improving their future. But his plans slowly became requests. His requests became pressure. He began asking for account information, signatures, and personal documents. Wren discovered too late that Aaron had used her name as a guarantee on loans he could not repay. The calls began before sunrise. Unknown numbers filled her phone. Letters arrived with unfamiliar company names. Aaron stopped answering. The final night in her apartment came without shouting. Only the sound of someone knocking hard enough to shake the old doorframe. When Wren opened it, a notice envelope sat on the floor outside. Inside was a paper she did not recognize and a warning connected to Aaron's unpaid debts. Her mother arrived later, but she did not step inside. She held Wren's spare key in her hand and looked at the hallway behind her daughter. "I cannot risk bringing this into our home." 8 words. Wren remembered them because her mother never said anything after. The key stayed in her mother's palm. The door closed quietly. For 6 weeks, Wren moved through eastern Pennsylvania with a canvas bag, a borrowed coat, and less money every few days. She slept 2 nights in the Philadelphia bus station, 3 nights in a women's shelter near Reading, and later on a bench near Lancaster after the shelter reached capacity. She worked short shifts washing dishes, folding clothes, and organizing shelves. The money disappeared slowly and then all at once. $5 became $3. $3 became coins at the bottom of her bag. She avoided calling anyone because every conversation seemed to lead back to the same place she had already lost. One rainy afternoon, she entered a public library in Harrisburg just to sit somewhere warm. The building smelled of paper and dust, a familiar scent that reminded her of Clara's workshop. Near the community bulletin board, beneath notices for used furniture and local repairs, she saw a small classified advertisement printed on yellow paper. Historic papermill drying shed. Former craft property. Sold as is. $8. The amount seemed almost impossible. The listing explained that the structure was considered unusable, the land was difficult to maintain, and the county intended to remove it if nobody claimed responsibility. Wren read the notice 3 times. She did not see a ruined building. She saw a place where old tools might still exist. A place where forgotten work might still be waiting. The next morning, she used her final bills to buy a bus ticket west toward the old mill district. She carried almost nothing with her except a canvas bag, Clara's paper fragment, and the quiet belief that some abandoned things were not finished yet. The road ahead would lead her to a shed everyone else had already decided was empty. The bus left her beside a narrow road where the pavement ended and the old mill country began. Wren stepped down with her canvas bag over one shoulder and watched the vehicle disappear behind a curve of bare trees. The driver had warned her there was no regular stop closer to the property. The last road was a walking road. She walked 11 miles that afternoon. The first 3 miles followed a county road lined with old stone walls and fields gone quiet after harvest. The next stretch narrowed into a gravel lane where the wheels of farm wagons had pressed 2 permanent tracks into the earth. By sunset, the temperature had fallen to 31 degrees Fahrenheit. A farmer named Thomas Bell allowed her to sleep in an unused hay barn after seeing her standing beside the road, reading the address written on the classified advertisement. He did not ask many questions. He pointed toward a loft ladder and said there was dry straw above. The barn smelled of hay, leather, and cold wood. Wren slept beneath an old blanket and listened to the wind move through the boards. In the morning, she thanked Thomas and continued walking. Rittenhousetown had once been a place of constant movement. Water turned wheels. Workers carried baskets of cotton scraps. Paper sheets hung in long rows beneath wooden roofs. By the time Wren arrived, the town had become quieter. She passed 5 businesses before reaching the county office: Bell's Sons Hardware with its faded green door, Margaret's Cafe with steam fogging the windows, Holloway General Store with stacked barrels outside, Whitman's Feed Supply beside the old road, and Rittenhouse Antiques, where a hand-painted sign leaned against the porch. None of them looked abandoned. They looked like places that had survived. The county clerk's office stood inside a brick building that had once been part of the mill administration complex. The floorboards creaked beneath her boots as she entered. Behind the counter sat a woman with silver hair pinned tightly behind her head. She wore a brown cardigan with a small ink stain near the sleeve cuff. A brass nameplate rested on the desk. Elizabeth Morrow, The clerk looked at the document in Wren's hand before looking at Wren. "You understand this property has no working water system?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the roof requires immediate repair?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the county will not restore it, maintain it, or protect it from future damage?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand that if you accept the deed, the responsibility becomes yours alone?" Wren placed her hand on the paper. "Yes, ma'am." Elizabeth studied her for a moment, then reached beneath the desk and brought out a brass stamp. The metal was heavy enough that it required both hands. The stamp came down with a dull sound. Not dramatic, just final. The directions were written on the back of the deed in careful handwriting. "Take Mill Road north until you reach the walnut trees," Elizabeth said. "The shed sits beyond the old creek crossing. You will know it because nobody has repaired anything there since the county closed it." Wren folded the paper carefully. As Elizabeth watched her prepare to leave, the clerk's expression changed. "Your name?" Wren looked back. "Your surname?" "Holloway." "Yes, ma'am." Elizabeth removed her glasses and looked again at the deed. Clara Whitmore knew someone with that name. Wren became still. "She was my grandmother's cousin." The clerk touched the edge of the document. "Clara came here every autumn. She asked about those records for years. She believed someone would eventually return." Wren did not know what to say. Nobody had mentioned Clara in months. Elizabeth reached into a drawer and pulled out a small envelope. "She left this here before she passed." Not a letter. Just a note saying that if a Holloway ever came looking for the drying shed, they should be allowed inside. The envelope was old. The paper inside was newer. Wren held it but did not open it. "Thank you," she said. Elizabeth nodded. "Take care of what is there." The walk to the property took another hour. Mill Road was mostly gravel, with patches where grass had grown through the centre. A man named Samuel Price passed her with a small brown dog following beside his wagon. The dog stopped and watched her. Samuel lifted a hand. "That place has been quiet a long time." Wren looked toward the trees. Maybe it was waiting. Samuel did not answer, but he smiled slightly before continuing. The walnut trees appeared near the creek crossing. Beyond them stood the drying shed. It was larger than the advertisement suggested, but time had reduced it to something fragile. The building measured roughly 40 feet long and 20 feet wide. The walls were made of weathered timber, darkened by decades of moisture and winter air. The roof sagged slightly along the eastern side. A narrow brick chimney rose above the corner, cracked but still standing. A faded wooden sign hung above the entrance. Rittenhouse Hand Paper Drying House. Half the letters had disappeared. Wren stood there for a long moment before touching the door. The wood felt rough beneath her fingers. The lock opened with difficulty. Inside, the air moved immediately. Cold air. Old air. The first room smelled of dried cloth, dust, and something faintly sweet beneath the decay. Her footsteps stirred particles from the floor, and the weak afternoon light entered through gaps in the boards. She saw broken drying racks along one wall, empty shelves, wooden frames stacked in corners. The silence was not empty. It carried evidence. Her hand moved across a work table covered in a thin layer of dust. Beneath her fingertips, she found shallow grooves cut into the wood from years of tools being placed in the same positions. In the back room, she found the remains of a small iron stove. The metal was cold. The ashes inside were untouched. The floor beneath the window had the strongest smell of old paper. Not fresh paper, old paper. The kind that had absorbed seasons. That first night, Wren slept on the floor beside the work table using her coat as a pillow. She had no fire, no proper bed. and no certainty about tomorrow. But she had a deed. She had a door that locked, and for the first time in 6 weeks, nobody was asking her to leave. From what was discarded, something worthy could be made again. The first 3 days belonged to the small problems, not the kind that appeared in advertisements or county records. The problems that only revealed themselves when someone stayed long enough to notice them. On the first morning, Wren carried water from the creek after finding the old well covered with a broken wooden lid. The rope had rotted, and the bucket was missing. She spent 2 hours clearing leaves, checking the stone lining, and making sure the water remained usable. The outhouse stood behind the shed beneath a leaning walnut tree. Its door would not close because the hinges had rusted through. She repaired it with wire from an old storage box and a piece of flattened metal she found near the back wall. By the 3rd day, she knew the floor, not every board, every sound. The board near the entrance complained with a low wooden groan. The one beside the work table clicked once before settling. The corner near the back wall shifted slightly whenever the temperature dropped. The building was speaking. She was learning how to listen. On the 4th morning, Wren walked into Bell & Sons Hardware carrying the smallest amount of confidence she could manage. The store sat beneath a faded green awning. Inside, shelves reached nearly to the ceiling, filled with jars of screws, folded canvas, wooden handles, and tools that looked older than the people who used them. The owner was a large man named Walter Bell. His left hand had a missing fingertip, and he always kept a pencil tucked behind his right ear. The pencil was sharpened so often that it had become shorter than his thumb. He looked at the list Wren had written. "You are repairing the old drying shed? Trying?" Walter looked up. "Most people would burn the wood and sell the land. I am not most people." He studied her for a moment. Then he took the list. "Open an account." Wren shook her head. "I cannot pay today. I did not say today. I cannot promise when." Walter placed the paper on the counter. "Then promise you will keep working." That was the agreement. Not a loan. Not charity. A beginning. Before she left, Walter handed her a thin booklet covered in brown paper. "My grandfather wrote this for people who wanted to repair old buildings without replacing everything." Wren opened it. Inside were handwritten notes about traditional repairs, roof angles, wood treatment, and lime mortar. "Why give this to me?" Walter adjusted the pencil behind his ear. "Because old things need someone patient." The first supplies cost less than she expected because Walter charged only what she needed. A box of hand-forged nails cost $4.25. A chimney brush cost $3.80. A bag of lime cost $2.60. Cotton work gloves cost $1.15. A small jar of wood preservative cost $5.40. A replacement bucket for the well cost $2.75. The numbers were small. The work was not. The chimney became her first serious project. From the ground, it looked damaged. From the roof, she understood how much. The upper bricks had begun separating because moisture had entered the old joints. The mortar had turned soft and powdery. When she brushed the surface, grey dust fell like ash. She spent 2 mornings removing loose material carefully, never pulling harder than necessary. She cleaned the joints with a narrow tool, brushed away the old creosote deposits inside the flue, and checked the chimney opening with a mirror and candle flame. The candle smoke revealed the problem. The draught was uneven. For 2 days, she studied the old construction and compared it with Walter's booklet. She learned that the chimney was not failing because it was old. It was failing because nobody had listened to it. The cleaning alone took 6 hours. The repair took another 3 days. She mixed fresh mortar using hydraulic lime and carefully packed each joint by hand. She did not try to make the chimney look new. She tried to make it honest again. When the final brick was set, Wren climbed down after sunset. Her hands ached. Her clothes were covered in dust. She had spent the entire day talking to nobody, but the chimney stood straighter. That night, she built her first fire. The flames took slowly, then steadily. The iron stove warmed one corner of the room, and for the first time since arriving, Wren cooked something besides food that required no preparation. She heated a small pot of soup. The smell filled the drying shed. Warm vegetables. Salt. Smoke from honest wood. She ate sitting on an overturned crate while rain tapped against the repaired chimney. The building felt different. Not fixed, but alive. The workroom behind the back wall became her next discovery. She cleaned it slowly over several days. Inside, she found a wooden pulp stirrer with a smooth handle worn by decades of hands, a copper screen with a repaired corner, 3 drying boards made from old pine, a stone weight used for pressing sheets, a small brush for removing loose fibres, 2 empty glass jars that still carried traces of old sizing material, a notebook with several pages stuck together from moisture. None of it looked valuable. That was why she trusted it. The valuable things were often the ones that survived without being noticed. On the 7th day of cleaning, she heard something strange. A sound beneath the workbench. Not loud. Just wrong. The floorboard moved differently when she stepped near it. Wren stopped. She tapped the wood with her knuckles. One sound, then another. The second sound was hollow. She removed the old boards around the area and found a circular piece of cedar fitted beneath them. The cedar disc had no nails, no visible hinges, only a small seam around the edge. She lifted it carefully. Inside was a narrow space. Wrapped bundles rested within. The first package contained several antique papermaking tools, each wrapped in cloth. The second held raw linen fibres sealed inside wax paper. The third was a small tin box. Her hands became slower. Not from fear, from respect. Inside the tin box were old coins, carefully arranged. She counted them once. Then again. $34,800. The total was impossible to understand at first. The money came from different years and different places. There were Morgan silver dollars, Liberty half dollars, Indian head pennies, and buffalo nickels. At the bottom of the box rested a small military medal dated 1918. No note. No explanation. Only the objects. Wren sat on the floor until the light disappeared. She did not open the remaining folded papers. She did not search for more. She carried the bundles to the table and covered them with cloth. That night, she walked outside instead. The creek moved quietly beyond the walnut trees. The water reflected the moon in broken pieces. She sat beside it for a long time, listening to something that had waited beneath the floor. Not an answer. Not yet. Just a beginning. From what was discarded, something worthy could be made again. The morning after finding the hidden compartment, Wren did not open the papers immediately. She made coffee first. She swept the floor. She carried water from the creek. The ordinary movements mattered because the discovery had changed the weight of the room. The drying shed no longer felt like a place she had purchased. It felt like a place that had trusted her with something. When she finally returned to the work table, she carried the oldest bundle carefully. The cloth wrapping had faded almost completely. The string holding it together had softened with age but had not broken. Beneath the layers, she found a folded letter. The handwriting stopped her. She knew those lines, not because she had seen the exact page before, but because she had watched those same hands write recipes, measurements, and small notes beside paper samples. Clara's handwriting. Wren sat down. She unfolded the paper. The creases opened exactly where they had been folded more than a century earlier. The letter began, "My dear one, whoever you are, if you're reading this, then the drying house has found another careful pair of hands. My name is Clara Whitmore, and I leave these words not because I expect anyone to remember me, but because work has a way of travelling farther than a person's name. I was born in 1848 near Germantown, Pennsylvania, the daughter of Samuel Whitmore, who learned hand paper making from Joseph Rittenhouse's remaining craftsman. My mother, Eleanor Price Whitmore, taught me how to prepare linen fibres and judge water by the way it moved through the fingers. My father learned from his father before him. Samuel's father, Thomas Whitmore, worked beside mill families in 1812. Thomas learned from his uncle William, who carried the craft forward after the original Rittenhouse paper trade declined. 4 generations before you, their hands shaped sheets that carried newspapers, letters, and records through this country. The trade closed officially on October 14th, 803. After that day, many people believed the work had disappeared. It had not. It simply became quiet. I carried the knowledge for more than 30 years without telling many people. Silence is sometimes chosen because the world no longer knows what to do with something careful. My husband, James, was lost during the Civil War in 1864 at the Battle of Cold Harbor in Virginia. He was buried far from this place. Our son never reached adulthood. After those losses, the paper became the family I could still tend. If you wish to continue this work, remember these things. Soak clean cotton or linen fibers for no less than 5 days before beating them into pulp. Keep the pulp mixture close to a ratio of 1 part fiber to 20 parts clear water. When forming a sheet, lift the mold slowly and evenly, keeping the motion steady for at least 10 seconds so the fibers settle without breaking. Dry the finished sheets between felt layers for several days, never forcing them with unnecessary heat. The craft is not about making paper quickly. It is about understanding what remains after everything unnecessary has been removed. A person can be like that. A place can be like that. An inheritance is not measured by what is placed in your hands. It is measured by what you are willing to carry forward. If you have found this letter, then you have already done the most important thing. You stayed. You listened. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Clara Whitmore, March 3, 1904. Wren read the letter twice. The second time was slower. She folded it along the original creases, matching each line carefully until the paper returned to the shape it had held for more than a century. Then she walked through the back door. Behind the shed, beyond the walnut trees, she found the marker Clara had described. It was not a monument. It was a simple stone placed beside the old foundation line of a former drying frame. The engraving was small. C. Whitmore. Wren placed her hand against the stone, the same hand that had repaired the chimney, the same hand that had counted the coins, the same hand that had carried Clara's paper fragment for years. Inside the workroom, she found one remaining object from the hidden bundle, a brass moulding tool. She cleaned it with a cloth and placed it beside the window. That evening, she lit the old oil lantern found beneath the workbench. The flame was small. The room was still unfinished, but the light reached every corner. The kindness that carried Wren here had not come from one person. It had arrived in pieces. Elizabeth Morrow had saved Clara's note. Walter Bell had opened a credit account. Thomas Bell had given her a night in his hay barn. Margaret from the cafe had left a warm meal wrapped in paper beside the hardware store entrance without asking for payment. None of them knew they were building a bridge. They were only placing one board at a time. Sometimes the smallest kindness is the one that gives another person enough ground to stand on. What is one small kindness someone once gave you that you still remember today? Wren did not have an answer written down. She did not need one. That night, she slept beside the work table with the heirloom tools wrapped safely beside her. The letter rested beneath her coat. The lantern burned low, and the old drying shed held its silence around her like something gentle. The first snow arrived on December 6th, covering the drying shed roof with 4 inches of wet, heavy snow before Wren had finished preparing the repairs. She brought Clara's notes to the table and read the roofing section 3 times. Not because she could not understand it, because old instructions deserved attention. The roof measured approximately 20 feet by 40 feet. Walter helped her calculate the materials needed: 28 bundles of cedar shingles, 6 rolls of roofing felt, and nearly 15 pounds of galvanized nails. The first morning she returned to the hardware store, Walter placed something on the counter, a roofing hatchet. The wooden handle was dark from age. "My uncle used this," he said. Wren touched the blade. "I cannot take this. You can borrow it." "Until when?" Walter looked toward the window. "Until the roof is finished. The next week." An older man named Arthur Bell arrived carrying a tool belt and a weathered coat. He had repaired roofs for 40 years before his hands became slower. "I heard you were using a straight ladder on a bad slope," he said. Wren lowered her eyes. "Was I?" Arthur looked up at the roof. "You were." He did not ask for payment. He simply climbed. For 11 days, they worked through cold mornings and early darkness. Arthur showed her how to check a sister rafter before replacing it, how to snap a chalk line that followed the existing structure, and how to set each nail with 3 controlled strokes. The work was quiet. "You are learning." Wren looked at the roof. "I am trying." Arthur smiled. "That is learning." Later, when Wren placed one crooked nail, Arthur tapped it gently. "That nail's proud." She laughed quietly. "Meaning, standing too high. Fix it, pull it." By mid-December, the final cedar shingles were secured. The roof was not new. It was stronger than new. It belonged to the building again. The chimney demanded patience. Several bricks had begun to spall, leaving small pieces scattered across the roof each morning. The mortar between the joints had turned into grey powder. Wren removed the damaged sections carefully. She mixed hydraulic lime with fire clay according to the repair notes, keeping the ratio precise enough that the mortar remained flexible but durable. The work lasted 3 weeks. Most mornings stayed in the 20s Fahrenheit. Her fingers went numb every 15 minutes. She would climb down, warm her hands beside the stove, then return. The chimney was not repaired by force. It was rebuilt layer by layer. She replaced loose bricks, packed fresh mortar into cleaned joints, and checked the alignment after every section. At the end of January, she prepared the first serious test fire. The stove warmed slowly. The smoke rose, then moved upward, cleanly. No backdraft, no dark cloud falling into the room. Wren stood beside the stove and watched the smoke disappear into the repaired chimney. The house breathed easier. The floors waited beneath years of dust. When Wren removed the old coverings, she found white pine planks darkened by time and marked by thousands of footsteps that had disappeared before she arrived. The boards still held their shape. They only needed care. She rented a random orbit sander from Walter's store for $14 per day. The first pass used 80 grit paper. The second used 120. The final pass used 220. She worked slowly because rushing would erase the marks that proved the floor's age. After sanding, she applied 3 coats of oil finish, waiting between each layer and allowing a full 48-hour cure after the final coat. The colour changed gradually. What had looked almost black became deep honey, then moved toward the shade of old mahogany. One morning, Wren woke early, ready to work. Then she saw the great blue heron standing near the marsh. It remained perfectly still. She sat on the porch for hours. No repairs, no measurements, no tools, just the bird and the quiet water. The next day, she returned to the floor. The windows revealed how long the building had waited. There were 8 in total. 3 had no glass. 4 carried cracks across their panes. 1 remained original. The glass was imperfect, slightly uneven, and dated back to 1788. Wren cleaned around that window carefully and preserved it exactly as it was. For the others, she repaired the frames and used traditional glazing methods. She applied DAP 33 glazing putty slowly, pressing it into place with a putty knife until the edges held firm. The sash cords required more attention. She replaced them with 1/4-inch cotton cord and tied each counterweight connection with a figure-8 knot. The last window took an entire afternoon. When she finished, she stepped outside. A chickadee landed on the walnut branch beside the glass. The bird tilted its head toward the repaired window. Wren stood still. For a moment, the drying shed did not feel restored. It felt recognized. The walls revealed their own history. Behind the old coverings, Wren found hand-split oak lath still attached beneath layers of damaged plaster. The original builders had worked carefully, leaving evidence in every uneven surface. The first 3 patches near the chimney failed. The first cracked overnight. The second separated after drying. The third held for a week before falling away in one piece. Wren returned to Walter's store and found an old bag of horsehair stored in the back room. "My grandfather kept everything," Walter said. She smiled. "That seems familiar." The repair required lime plaster mixed with horsehair for strength. She applied 3 coats slowly. The first was a scored scratch coat pressed into the lath. The second was a 3/8-inch brown coat that required a 72-hour cure. The final layer was a 1/8-inch finish coat, smoothed carefully until it matched the surrounding wall. When the last section dried, Wren placed her palm against it. "These patches will hold another 100 years. She did not know if that was true, but she had learned that careful work was often a promise. By March, people had started appearing at the drying shed. Not many, just enough. Doris from Margaret's Cafe was the first. She was a small woman with silver earrings and flour always dusted across one sleeve of her apron. She began leaving paper bags on the doorstep every Thursday morning. Bread, soup, fruit. When Wren tried to pay, Doris pushed the money back. "No, I cannot keep accepting this." Doris adjusted the paper bag handle. "Then pay me in candles when the shop reopens." Wren kept the promise. A week later, Caleb arrived. He was 17, riding an old Schwinn bicycle with a splitting maul tied across the back rack. The bicycle chain clicked with every movement. "I heard you needed wood split." Wren looked at the axe. "I can pay you." Caleb shook his head. My mother said, "About your grandfather." That was all he said. He worked until sunset. The next morning, the woodpile was higher, the stack was straighter, and the axe was gone. Reverend Boyd passed every morning on his walk along Mill Road. He was tall and thin, with a worn black coat and a silver watch chain across his vest. He never stopped long. He simply tipped his hat. Some mornings, he offered the same 4 words. Keep the light burning. Then he continued down the road. The drying shed became full of these small arrivals. No announcements, no celebration, only people quietly adding what they could. Wren postponed the cellar until February 11th. The rest of the house had required attention first. The entrance was hidden beneath a warped floor section behind the workroom. When she opened it, 7 granite steps descended into darkness. The cellar measured 12 by 15 feet. The floor was fieldstone. The walls were old granite. At the center rested a dressed granite slab with a carved craft mark pressed into its surface. Wren cleaned around it. She did not lift it. Some things could remain closed. Under the 3rd step, she found a small oak box wedged into the space between stones. Inside was a brass key. The bow of the key was shaped like the symbol used by old papermakers to mark their finest work. Beneath it rested a tintype photograph. The image showed a young woman standing outside the cottage in 1903. She held a papermaking tool. Wren stared. The woman had her face. Not exactly, but enough. On the back of the photograph, written in faded ink, were the words, Clara Whitmore, daughter of Samuel Whitmore, age 25, summer of 1903. The key remained on the mantel. Wren did not know what it opened. She decided that was acceptable. Section 5H, March and April, Spring. By April, the snow had retreated. The creek became louder. The walnut trees produced their first green catkins. Wren stood inside the restored drying shed and looked at the empty work tables. She could begin full production. She had the tools. She had the notes. She had the space. But she chose not to rush. That spring, she would spend 1 coin from the hidden cash. Only 1. She would buy materials and practice with small samples. A single sheet. A single improvement. A single careful attempt. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later. In December 2024, the first finished piece left the drying shed. It was not large. It was not displayed anywhere. It was a handmade sheet of cotton paper created from local fibers, pressed slowly beneath the old iron weight, and dried beside the same windows that had waited through decades of silence. Wren placed her mark at the bottom. Not a signature. A small symbol. The same symbol found on the brass key. Inside, the restored interior remained modest. The old pine floors held a quiet shine. The chimney warmed the room. The original 1788 window still carried its uneven glass. The work tables were clean, but not untouched. The room looked used. That mattered. The brass key stayed on the mantel until the spring of the 2nd year. One afternoon, while clearing branches from the walnut tree, Wren noticed a small brass plate hidden beneath the bark. The shape matched the key. She inserted it carefully. The lock opened. Inside the hollow section of the tree was a folded 48-star American flag and another note sealed inside wax paper. The handwriting was Clara's. The date was from 1918. It had been written during the final months of World War I. The note explained that the military medal belonged to Thomas Whitmore, a family member who had served and died overseas. Clara had preserved it because she believed every generation carried responsibility for remembering those who had paid the price before them. Wren carried the medal to a national cemetery in Pennsylvania on November 11th, 2026, the anniversary of Armistice Day. She placed it among the records of the family history, quietly, without ceremony. The money from the hidden compartment remained almost untouched. Wren used only 3 silver coins for materials, repairs, and paper supplies during the first years. The remaining cash stayed sealed inside a small locked box. On the lid, she wrote, "For the next one." The craft shop reopened without a grand opening. Doris placed a simple index card on the cafe corkboard. Handmade paper lessons. OLD Mill Road. ASK Wren. Within months, more than 40 names sat on the mailing list. People did not come because the shop promised something extraordinary. They came because they wanted to learn something careful. Caleb returned one autumn morning carrying a wooden sign. He had carved it by hand. The letters were uneven. The wood was beautiful. It read, "Daughters." Wren looked at him. "Why daughters?" Caleb shrugged. "My mother said every craft survives because someone teaches someone else." She placed the sign beside the door. Years later, when Wren finally wrote her own letter, she began with the same words Clara had chosen. "My dear one, whoever you are." She wrote about the roof, the chimney, the people who left bread, the boy with the bicycle, the building that had taught her how to remain. She did not write about being rescued. She wrote about being welcomed from what was discarded. Something worthy could be made again. The drying shed had never truly been empty. It had been waiting for someone willing to listen. The papermill drying shed waits. It has always waited. And somewhere inside the old county clerk's desk, behind a stack of forgotten papers, the original $8 bill remained tucked away in Elizabeth Morrow's drawer. Not as payment, not as proof, only as a reminder that sometimes the smallest amount is enough to begin again. Script complete. Total approximately 4,500 characters,